The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and warm bread. My mother's best plates were set on the table. My father had opened his expensive wine, and everything looked perfect, until my phone buzzed quietly beneath the table. I was sitting beside my husband, Dominic Hart, the man who once told me I was the calm in his storm. I glanced at the screen and felt my heart drop. One message from him: stand up, leave, don't explain. At first I thought it was a joke. I turned my head slowly toward Dominic, but he didn't look at me. He kept smiling at my father, discussing business as if nothing had happened, his hand resting warm and steady on my knee beneath the table. Then a second buzz. Now. My mother was laughing about something from my childhood. My father was pouring more wine. I don't know exactly why I listened. Maybe because I loved him. Maybe because I trusted him. Maybe because when you love someone deeply, you don't expect them to humiliate you. I placed my napkin beside my plate and said softly that I wasn't feeling well. That was the only lie I told that night. My mother's smile faded, and she asked what was wrong, and I told her I just needed some air. Dominic finally looked at me then, his eyes too calm, too steady. Go rest, sweetheart, he said gently. The words sounded like sugar, but felt like a command. I walked out. Every step felt heavy, and I could feel my parents' confusion behind me. When I reached my car, my phone buzzed one more time. Good girl. I froze. My stomach twisted. That was not love. That was ownership. The drive home felt longer than usual, and memories came flooding back, soft ones from the beginning. When Dominic and I first met, he used to kiss my forehead before speaking. He once told me he didn't want to lead me. He wanted to walk beside me. We would cook together, and he'd wrap his arms around my waist and whisper something playful about burning for me instead of the food. Those were warm, gentle days. Long talks about dreams and children and future vacations. Back then, if he said stay, it felt romantic. Now if he said leave, it felt like a test. When I got home, the house was silent, and I sat in the dark. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. Dominic walked in, removed his coat calmly, and said I had left exactly when he told me to. I asked what that had all been about, and he smiled and said it showed I trusted him. I told him it wasn't trust, it was confusion. He said it was attractive when a wife listened. I asked whether there was a difference between listening and obeying, and he tilted his head as if the question genuinely puzzled him. Then he leaned close and told me quietly that he leads, his hand on my waist in that slow, familiar, intimate way that once felt like love, but now felt like control dressed as romance. I stepped back and said no. That single word surprised even me. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, not love, but something that looked like competition, like he was keeping score. He told me I was tired and that we'd talk tomorrow, then walked upstairs without touching me again. That hurt more than the command had. I stayed downstairs alone with the truth. I thought about my father's confused face and my mother's worried voice, and I thought about how easily I had followed an order without question. Love should feel safe, not supervised. Marriage should feel equal, not measured. I remembered something from the previous month, a barbecue at a friend's house, when someone had joked about who wore the pants in our marriage. Dominic had smirked and said, "Let's just say when I say jump, she checks how high." Everyone had laughed, including me, because I thought it was just a joke. Now I wasn't so sure. When I finally went upstairs, he was already in bed, lights off, back turned. I slid in quietly. After a moment, he reached back and took my hand and told me not to be dramatic. I said I had left my parents' dinner without explanation. He said I'd see them again. I said that wasn't the point. He pulled me close and said we were a team, and I said teams don't give secret orders, and he didn't respond. He just wrapped his arm around my waist, his breath warm on my neck, and said he loved me. And for the first time, I wasn't sure whether that sentence meant I respect you or I own you. My eyes stayed open long after he fell asleep. The next morning, he was in the kitchen making coffee, as if nothing had happened. I didn't take the cup he offered me. I asked him calmly why he had told me to leave dinner, and after a moment of false casualness, he called it an experiment. That word hit me harder than I expected. He explained that he and the men had been talking about marriage and leadership, and that he had told them he didn't chase control because he already had it. I said softly that he had made a bet, and he smiled and said I was smart. When I pressed him, he admitted it wasn't about money, but about pride. He had wanted to prove something to his friends, and I had proved it for him. I told him he had humiliated me. He said no one had known. I said I had known, and that stopped him for just a moment before he shrugged and said I had still left. That sentence changed everything, because it wasn't about love at all. It was about power. I kept my face calm while I quietly pulled out my phone and pressed record. I asked him to say it clearly, and he sighed and said he had tested me and I had passed his leadership test, that he had told his friends when he said move, I move. Then he kissed my forehead and called me his perfect wife. That felt like an insult. That night when he reached for me in the dark, his touch was familiar and intimate, but something in me stayed distant. I understood now the simple difference between love and control. Love makes you feel chosen. Control makes you feel managed. And I was no one's project. A week later, we attended a gathering with the same friends. I wore a red dress, not for him, for me. When one of the men grinned and asked Dominic if he was still in charge, Dominic laughed and said he didn't compete, he demonstrated. I smiled sweetly and agreed, adding that I always followed directions, especially when they led somewhere unexpected. Dominic squeezed my hand, thinking I was playing along. He had no idea I was preparing my exit. Later, one of the wives found me and said quietly that control looks strong from the outside, but is heavy to carry. I told her it's only heavy if you believe you're carrying it alone, and I saw real understanding in her eyes for the first time. 2 days later, I met with a lawyer, a quiet woman with kind eyes. I played the recording. She listened without expression, and when it ended, she said 2 words, emotional manipulation, and added that it was very clear. Hearing it from someone else made it real. She asked me gently whether I wanted to stay. I thought about the kitchen embraces and the whispered promises and the way he had once looked at me like I was his entire world. Then I heard his voice in my mind saying, "Good girl," and I told her no. I wanted to leave. When Dominic received the divorce papers, he laughed at first and called me dramatic again. When he saw I wasn't smiling, he said I couldn't be serious. I told him I was. He said it had been harmless, and I told him that harmless things don't require secret tests. He stepped closer and said, I would regret it, and I said maybe, but I wouldn't regret respecting myself. In court, he was composed and charming and polished, speaking about love and misunderstanding. Then my lawyer played the recording. His voice filled the quiet room. I tested you and you passed. When I say move, you move. And the silence that followed was absolute. His face lost color. For the first time, he looked small. Not powerful, not confident, just exposed. The man who loved control had lost it completely. He tried to look at me, and I didn't look back, because closure doesn't always need eye contact. Sometimes it just needs distance. 3 months later, I sat in my new apartment. It was smaller and simpler and peaceful, with the windows open and the air feeling free. I made dinner alone with soft music in the background, moving slowly and gently, without waiting for instructions. I visited my parents often, with no more sudden exits and no more secret messages. One evening, my father asked softly if I was okay, and I smiled and told him that for the first time in a long time, yes, I truly was. I once thought obedience was loyalty, but loyalty without respect is just quiet surrender. I didn't leave that dinner table because I was weak. I left because I hadn't yet learned my strength. Now I have, and it is louder than any command.